This is how to piece really skinny lines. First of all, you want to slice through the fabric where you want the line to go, thusly. And then after that, take your other fabric and cut a straight of grain strip that's 5/8 inch wide. Just like I'm showing you how to do this here. Next thing you want to do is sew it, but make sure you sew it with a really scant 1/4 inch seam. You can see I'm doing that here on my really old 1950 Singer. I like to finger press it open so I get a nice fold, and then take it and steam iron it really well. And you want to press your seam away from the skinny line. Next thing you want to do is to trim this to, 3/8 inch. It seems a little tiny, but when you want a skinny line, you gotta trim it small. Look how pretty that is. So when you sew it on the sewing machine, you want the strip side up so you can see where your other seam line was. So you can look at the picture here and see how I can see exactly how wide I'm making that strip. After I'm done, you want to press it, and you want to admire your gorgeous line. I'm good at admiring. So what if you want another one right next to the first one? Well, the first thing you want to do is get those old seams pressed out of the way. So take it back to your iron and press it so that you press everything away from where you're going to be sewing your new line. And then once again, we'll cut a 5/8 inch strip. We will sew it on with a scant 1/4 inch seam, just like we did the first time. And we will press it, and we will sew it just like we did before. This is sewing it on the first time. And here we are. It's pressed. It's ready to go. And when you sew this onto the other piece of yellow fabric, you want to trim it to your 3/8 inch. You want your selvages to line up so that you can really see, your raw edges to line up, so you can really not have to worry about what's going on underneath and concentrate on making that line as skinny as you want it. So once again, we're sewing from the side where you can see, and now we got 2 lines close to each other, and then when I press them so that they lie nice and flat. I don't really pay much attention. So how about if you want a curved line? What are we going to do? We're going to put 2 pieces of fabric right sides up, and we're going to cut our curve through both of them at the same time. So you can see here, I've cut through both fabrics. I'm going to remove one of each so that I have the blue being sewed onto the yellow curve. I'm going to pin it starting at about 3/4 inch apart. It depends on how tight your curve is, but I just got to flip mine over, and I start at the apex of that curve, and I pin in both directions. So I pin to one side and then the other side. Now be aware that because we have no seam allowance, your ends are not going to line up. So just pin, make it as smooth as you can. We're pinning all towards the top, and now we're going to be pinning the other direction. There we go. And we're going to get it all pinned, and then we're going to go over and we're going to sew it with the concave on top so we can make sure we don't get any puckers as we sew. Ta-da! Ready to go. And when I sew my curves, I take it nice and slow. There's no rush. I have time to make sure that this curve is as smooth and pucker-free as possible. So I'll just keep going. And then I'm going to press this also away from the skinny line. You can see how I've done that there, so you can see your seam stitching. And then once again, guess what? We're going to trim it to 3/8 inch. And it looks really, really skinny sometimes, but you need to do that so that you've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that leaves you 1/8 inch for your skinny line. So go ahead and trim it. Notice how the ends don't line up. I'm going to kind of just trim those off at this point so that they're not confusing to me. And I'm going to bring the other side of my yellow fabric over. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to turn it. I'm going to start pinning right there at the apex of the curve. I'm going to do 3/4 inch apart, and I'm going to go first to one direction and then come back and pin to the other until it's all pinned. Now this time I have to sew it from the side, the convex side, because I need to see that first stitching line. Take it to your machine and sew, and watch what you're doing as you go. And yep, I sew over my pins, but I also wear glasses, and I find that my Singer old sewing machine really rarely gets a direct hit. Do what you'd like to do best. After you press it open, you can see how I've pressed the seam open to kind of reduce bulk. I'm going to trim off my excess at both ends so that it's nice and neat. I always find it nice to work with something that's nice and neat and pressed well. It just is cleaner, and it looks prettier, and it makes me happier. So there we go. We've got our first curved line. Now you can make this as small or as large. You can make it a half circle. You can do anything you want with that curve. You do it the same way. And now we're going to add another curve to this. And we're going to take our same piece of fabric. We're going to put it back underneath it, because we know those two are straight of grain, both of them the same grain. You're going to cut through both fabrics at the same time. If you had wanted your other curve to be at the outside, you would have used your other piece of fabric that you had cut off. So here we go. We're going to take the underneath out. We're going to take the underneath blue, and we're going to, guess what? Pin it in the exact same way. Start at the apex. This is a smaller curve. You might want to pin your pins a little bit closer together. Now, some people like to use glue. I don't use glue much because I can never find it, and my nozzle's always stopped up. So pins to me are just easier, but do what you're familiar with. What I don't suggest is not gluing or pinning, because you want your curve to be as smooth as possible and be the same curve on both sides, and not stretch it underneath when you sew it. So here we have it, all pinned together. There we go. And guess what? We're going to go over, we're going to sew it with a scant 1/4 inch seam, just like we did before. Sewing over my pins again. Sorry about that if that kind of makes you cringe. And we are still doing what we did for the first curve. We're going to take it, we're going to press the seam away from the skinny line so we can see the stitching line. We're going to trim it to 3/8 of an inch. It really looks tiny on this picture, but trust me, it will still give you that 1/4 inch seam when you sew it. Trim off your edges. There we go. Perfect. Now we're going to take it and we're going to, pin it again. Start in the middle, just like we did before. Pin to both sides. And sew it on. And when you're stitching curves, you want that scant 1/4 inch to be as scant as you can get it and still be a nice, solid seam. Just because it's a curve, and it makes it easier to press it and open it. So here we are. We're all pinned. Now this time we have to sew it from the convex side because we want to see that first seam line. And there we go. We got it done. Press everything nice and flat and open. And let's trim off that excess. Look how neat that is. Yep. Alrighty. Go. And what do you think? 2 skinny lines. And there's our 2 straight lines. Now, wasn't that easy? Just remember to use right sides up, match your grain of fabrics. I used lots of starch, sew from your strip side up, and don't sew over your pins. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you make some. Thanks.